Caleb Turner had spent his whole life believing that the world only made sense when rules were clear and lines were never crossed. Out on the flat Texas plains just outside Amarillo, his family's ranch stood like a monument to that belief. White fencing, red barn, cattle grazing in slow circles under an endless sky. He was 36, broad across the shoulders, steady with his hands, and known in town as a man who didn't bend. When he spoke, people listened, not because he was loud, but because he was certain. And Caleb was certain about marriage. He didn't want a complicated woman. He didn't want someone with stories attached to her name. He wanted a virgin bride, pure, untouched. The way it used to be, he'd say without shame. Some folks admired him for sticking to tradition. Others whispered that he was chasing an idea, not a person. Caleb ignored the whispers. He believed standards protected a man from heartbreak. He believed experience changed people in ways that couldn't be undone. Most of all, he believed he would lead his home, and his wife would follow. Then, Autumn Harper moved into the old farmhouse bordering the south end of his property. The house had been empty for years, paint fading, porch leaning just enough to look tired. The day she arrived, the wind carried dust across the pasture as a silver SUV pulled up the gravel drive. Caleb noticed because he noticed everything that happened near his land. She stepped out wearing jeans, boots, and a plain cream blouse. Her hair was tied back loosely, sunlight catching strands of chestnut brown. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. She simply stood there for a moment, hands on her hips, studying the house like she was calculating how to bring it back to life. He expected someone fragile. What he saw instead was steady. Over the next few weeks, she worked on that house alone. She repaired the porch boards herself. She painted the shutters a soft sage green. She fixed the fence line without asking for help. The town began to talk. She's from Colorado. No husband. Keeps to herself. She attended church on her second Sunday in town, sat near the back, sang softly, listened more than she spoke. When Mrs. Donnelly dropped her purse in the parking lot, Autumn was the first to kneel and help gather everything. She thanked the pastor. She smiled politely at strangers. She didn't flirt. She didn't advertise herself. And somehow that quiet confidence pulled at Caleb more than any painted smile ever had. He introduced himself near the property fence one late afternoon as the sun dipped low and turned the sky bronze. "Caleb Turner," he said, resting his arms on the wooden rail. "This land backs up to mine." She looked at him with calm gray eyes. Not impressed, not intimidated, just attentive. "Autumn Harper," she replied. Her voice was warm but grounded. "I figured I'd meet you eventually." He nodded toward the fence she had repaired. "You did that yourself?" "Seemed easier than waiting," she said lightly. Something about that answer unsettled him. It wasn't defiant. It was capable. Over the next month, he found reasons to stop by. Sometimes it was about cattle wandering too close to her side. Sometimes about water lines. Sometimes no reason at all. She always invited conversation, but never chased it. She asked about the ranch, about his parents, about the drought 5 years back. She listened carefully, like his words mattered. No one had listened to him like that in a long time. Caleb began to imagine her as his wife. She dressed modestly. She carried herself with dignity. She didn't mention past relationships. She didn't hint at history. In his mind, that silence meant purity. One evening, as crickets filled the fields with their steady rhythm, he decided to ask the question that mattered most to him. They were standing beside her newly painted porch, the air warm and scented faintly with cut grass. "Autumn," he began, his tone serious. don't believe in wasting time. I'm looking for a wife. I want a real marriage, traditional, honest. She studied his face carefully. And what does that look like to you? He didn't hesitate. It means commitment. It means loyalty. It means starting fresh. I want a woman who's never given herself to another man. The wind moved between them. She didn't flinch, didn't blush, didn't look away. Instead, she asked quietly, and what will you give her? The question caught him off guard. Everything, he said quickly. A home, stability, protection. Her eyes softened slightly. Protection from what? He frowned. From the world. She looked out over the pasture, where the horizon stretched endless and open. The world can't always be controlled, Caleb. He felt something tighten in his chest. Some things can. She didn't argue. She simply nodded once. If you're asking whether I've saved myself for marriage, she said calmly, the answer is yes. Relief flooded him faster than he expected. Pride followed close behind it. He told himself it was confirmation, proof that he had chosen wisely. Within 3 months they were engaged. The town buzzed with opinions. Some admired the speed, some questioned it. But Autumn moved forward with steady grace. She didn't demand a lavish wedding. She chose a simple white dress. She smiled when he spoke about building a future. And Caleb felt certain he had finally found exactly what he'd been waiting for. On their wedding night, after the guests had gone and the ranch house stood quiet under a sky full of stars, Caleb closed the bedroom door with firm confidence. This was the moment he had guarded his standards for. The moment that proved he had been right all along. Autumn stood near the window, moonlight brushing across her face. She turned slowly toward him, not nervous, not timid, just thoughtful. Caleb stepped closer, heart steady, expectations clear. He reached for her hands, prepared to lead, prepared to guide, prepared to teach. But as she looked up at him, there was something in her expression he hadn't prepared for at all. And when she finally spoke, her calm voice made him freeze where he stood. But as she looked up at him, there was something in her expression he hadn't prepared for at all. And when she finally spoke, her calm voice made him freeze where he stood. Before we take another step, Autumn said gently, I need you to understand something. Caleb's hands were still holding hers, but his confidence shifted slightly. This wasn't the nervous bride he had imagined guiding through uncertainty. This was a woman completely steady in herself. Understand what? He asked, trying to keep his tone firm. She didn't pull away. Instead, she guided him, just slightly, so they were sitting on the edge of the bed instead of standing like opponents in a standoff. The motion was subtle, but it unsettled him. He had planned to lead. Somehow, she had shifted the ground without force. You asked for a woman who saved herself, she continued softly. And I did. Not because a man demanded it. Not because a church told me to. I did it because I believed my body and my heart were worth protecting. Caleb swallowed. That wasn't the script he expected. He expected gratitude, maybe shyness, not ownership. That's what I wanted, he said carefully. Purity. Autumn's gray eyes held his. Purity isn't silence, Caleb. It isn't ignorance. It isn't obedience. The word obedience struck him harder than it should have. I never said. You didn't have to, she replied, not accusing, just honest. You've spent your life believing that if a woman has no past, she'll be easier to lead. The room felt smaller. The steady rhythm in his chest began to stumble. I want respect, he said defensively. And you deserve it. she answered. But respect isn't control. Her hands were still in his, but now he felt like she was anchoring him instead of the other way around. Do you know what experience really means? She asked. Caleb frowned slightly. It means baggage. She shook her head slowly. It means understanding. It means knowing who you are, what you need, what you will and won't accept. She leaned a little closer, not seductively, but sincerely. I may not have given myself physically to anyone before tonight, but I've lived. I've studied relationships. I've watched my parents' marriage fall apart because my father believed leadership meant dominance. I promised myself I would never enter a marriage where my voice disappeared. Her words landed like quiet thunder. He had never asked about her parents, never thought to. He assumed her silence meant simplicity. He realized now it meant depth. You want a traditional marriage? She continued. So do I. But tradition without kindness becomes fear, and fear is not love. The word kindness echoed in his mind. He remembered his mother once telling him, when he was 15 and angry at the world, strength without kindness becomes cruelty. He hadn't thought about that in years. Autumn stood slowly, then reached for his hand again, not to surrender, but to guide. She walked him toward the window where moonlight poured across the wooden floor. You froze, she said gently. Do you know why? He didn't answer. She did. Because you expected to teach. You didn't expect to learn. The truth hit him hard enough to take his breath. He had built this entire night around proof. Proof that he had chosen right, proof that he had preserved something rare. Instead, he felt exposed. Not as a man claiming victory, but as a boy realizing he misunderstood the lesson. I'm not here to challenge your faith, Autumn said. I'm here to build a life with you. But I will not shrink to make you feel taller. Silence filled the room, thick and honest. Caleb had faced cattle stampedes, drought seasons, and bank threats during hard winters. None of them made him feel as unsteady as this moment. I thought saving yourself meant you'd be inexperienced, he admitted quietly. She smiled, not mocking, but warm. Innocence and ignorance aren't the same thing. Then she did something that completely shifted the night. Instead of waiting for him to decide what happened next, she asked, What are you afraid of, Caleb? The question slipped past his defenses before he could stop it. Afraid? He didn't see himself as afraid. He saw himself as careful, controlled, disciplined. But as he stood there under the silver wash of moonlight, he realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't guarding purity. He was guarding himself. I don't want to be compared, he admitted after a long pause. The words felt foreign in his mouth. I don't want to fall short. Autumn's expression softened deeply. So you chose a woman with no past, so you'd never feel measured. He looked down. It sounded harsher when she said it, but it wasn't untrue. She stepped closer and placed her hand against his chest, directly over his pounding heart. Caleb, love isn't about being the first. It's about being safe. It's about being kind. It's about choosing each other every day. His breath slowed. The tension in his shoulders began to ease for the first time that night. She didn't rush him, didn't pressure him. Instead, she showed him what he had never practiced: emotional vulnerability. Tonight, she said softly, we don't prove anything. We begin something. The word begin felt different from conquer, different from led. It felt shared. He realized she wasn't taking control from him. She was offering partnership, and that scared him more than authority ever had, because partnership required humility. As she laced her fingers through his again, He understood that the reason he froze wasn't uncertainty about her innocence. It was the sudden realization that strength in marriage didn't look like dominance. It looked like trust. And trust meant stepping forward without needing to stand above. For the first time in his adult life, Caleb Turner didn't try to direct the moment. He listened. He allowed. He learned. And in that quiet Texas bedroom, beneath a sky full of witnesses, the cowboy who had demanded purity began to understand something far more powerful than control. He began to understand what it meant to be equal. But understanding something and living it were two very different things. The room felt quieter now, not tense, not uncertain, just honest. Caleb stood there in the soft Texas moonlight, realizing that for the first time in his life, he wasn't trying to win. He wasn't trying to prove he was right. He wasn't trying to stand taller than the woman in front of him. He was simply present. Autumn didn't rush him. She didn't fill the silence with speeches. She let the weight of the moment settle naturally between them. "Marriage isn't about who leads every step," she said softly. "It's about knowing when to walk side by side." Caleb nodded slowly. He had always believed leadership meant being ahead. Now he was beginning to see that sometimes strength meant matching pace. "I thought I had everything figured out," he admitted quietly. "I built this idea in my head of what a perfect wife looked like. I never stopped to ask what kind of husband I was becoming." Autumn stepped closer, not to overpower him, not to challenge him, but to stand beside him. "You're not wrong for wanting commitment," she said. "You're not wrong for valuing purity. But purity without compassion becomes pride. And pride can build walls inside a marriage." Those words landed deeper than anything else she had said. Caleb had spent years protecting himself from imagined comparisons, from imagined failures, from imagined threats. But he had never protected his heart from pride. "I don't want walls between us," he said. "Then don't build them," she replied gently. "Let me be your partner, not your project." That was the moment something shifted fully inside him. He realized that what made him freeze earlier wasn't fear of intimacy. It was fear of vulnerability. He had chosen a virgin bride thinking it would guarantee safety. But safety didn't come from someone's past. It came from how two people treated each other in the present. Caleb reached for her hands again, but this time not to lead, just to hold. "Teach me," he said quietly. Autumn smiled softly. "We teach each other." And that first night, nothing dramatic happened. There was no power struggle, no pride, no performance. There was conversation, laughter when nerves surfaced, honest questions, gentle reassurance. Caleb learned that strength could be calm, that intimacy wasn't about proving manhood, but about building trust. He learned that the woman he married was not fragile porcelain to be handled, nor empty space to be filled. She was whole, and he was learning how to stand beside someone whole without trying to reduce her. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the ranch house kitchen. Caleb woke before dawn as usual, but something inside him felt different, lighter. He stepped outside onto the porch and looked over his land. For years, he believed ownership meant control. Now he understood that love was not ownership, it was stewardship. When Autumn joined him, wrapping a light sweater around herself against the morning chill, she didn't ask what he was thinking. She simply stood next to him. Equal ground, equal sky, equal future. "You okay?" she asked softly. He nodded. "Yeah." Then after a pause, he added, "Better than okay." Over the next months, their marriage became something the town didn't expect. Caleb still worked hard, still carried his traditional values. But something in his tone changed. When neighbors joked about him finally training his bride, he didn't laugh. He said calmly, "She's not something to train, she's someone to respect." That surprised people. When disagreements came, as they always do, he didn't shut down the conversation. He listened. He learned that leadership sometimes meant admitting he was wrong. And Autumn never tried to embarrass him for it. She supported him publicly and corrected him privately with kindness. The ranch began to thrive in new ways too. Autumn introduced smarter budgeting. She started a small online livestock marketing strategy Caleb had never considered. He could have resisted. Instead, he asked questions. Together, they strengthened what his father had built. One evening, months later, Caleb found himself back at the same church barbecue where he once proudly announced his requirement for a virgin bride. The same wooden tables, the same sweet tea. But this time, when a younger man boldly declared he wanted a woman with no past, Caleb didn't nod. He leaned forward and said calmly, "Make sure you're ready to face your own first." The young man blinked in confusion. Caleb smiled slightly. A woman isn't easier to love because she's inexperienced. She's easier to love when you treat her with kindness. Autumn, standing a few steps away, heard him. Their eyes met across the yard. No dominance, no pride, just quiet understanding. That night, as the Texas sky turned deep indigo and the stars stretched wide above their ranch, Caleb wrapped his arm around his wife and whispered something he once would have been too proud to say. "Thank you for not shrinking." She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. "Thank you for growing." And in a town that once whispered about standards and expectations, people slowly began to see something stronger than tradition. They saw partnership. They saw patience. They saw a cowboy who once demanded purity, now living something deeper. Because in the end, the first night didn't make him powerful. It made him humble. And humility, he finally understood, was the foundation of real love. And that was the kind of strength that truly mattered.